I want to focus here for a minute on fall feeding. Fall feeding can be disastrous if not done correctly. The bees are finishing up with their fall flow, so they've got honey stores in the hive. They're very protective of the hive, and they're also hungry, looking for food sources. So if you're feeding, it's very important to do it correctly to prevent any sort of robbing issue and having crazy frenzy. I know all apiaries are different. Mine in particular is prone to robbing if I'm not careful, because I have about 75 hives in very close proximity to one another. So I have a whole integrated setup of what I do to prevent robbing, and as a result, I essentially have no robbing in my apiary, even on my little bitty 5-frame hives. And one of the huge components of that is this front entrance. This is what I call a hallway entrance, and it's just a series of small passages. It allows for lots of ventilation, and it allows for a lot of bees to be moving in and out, because the addition of all these together is pretty wide. But these halls make it very effective from a defensive standpoint for the bees to guard. So it only takes a few bees in these hallways to prevent robber bees from getting in. And even my little 5-frame nukes, they're down this size, they do really well with an event where another larger hive tries to invade because of these hallway entrances. So it's just something I wanted to point out. But I've tried many different type feeders over the past 8 years in my beekeeping experience. One of them I don't particularly care for are the in-hive frame feeders. For one thing, they displace, frames, which all my hives are full. I don't have any frames to take out. But the other thing is, you have to get in deep into the hive. You have to pull the inner cover off and expose all the bees in order to refill them. The other point is, typically they're painted black, or they're actually black plastic. You can't see in them. You can't see if the honey is fermenting. You can't really detect the level of how much honey is in there unless it's relatively full. If you do have a drowning issue, it's not as evident unless you pull the cap off of it. So I tend to stay away from those. I'm more of a hive top feeder, either the raft feeder or the rapid feeder. And rapid feeders are not all created equal either. This is my favorite rapid feeder, and it's primarily because this inner cone snaps on. So it's got a very positive detent, and that prevents bees from able to push this up and get out into the syrup area. Typically, if I have any drowning issues with these, it's one of two reasons. The hive's getting robbed, so you have a massive amount of bees up in here and they're forcing the other bees into the liquid. Or your honey has fermented, so the bees are getting drunk basically, and they're dying. The only other issue is, and it's a different style of feeder, which I've gotten away from. This is another rapid feeder, and this is one I definitely don't recommend. It's a hard plastic, so it's brittle, and if you drop it or push on it, it can snap. The other thing is this section here, it just sits on here. And what happens is, if your hive is slightly tilted, when they drink this syrup down, it'll be on one side. And what happens is all the bees move to that side, and as they drink all that syrup, they're pushing to try to get to the little bit that's just beyond their reach. And as they're doing that, when you have 40 or 50 bees in a line pushing, they can actually lift this up and they will get out, and bees just start scurrying out into the syrup. And then once they're out there and they've drinking all the syrup, this drops back down, they get trapped out here and they die. They die from exposure, from being left in this space. So one of the ways to fix that, these are all different styles, so I can't tell you exactly the best approach. You have to look at your particular feeder. Some of them, if there's enough gap between the top of the lid and this, you can just put a weight on there like a washer. That'll keep it down. On this particular one that I have here, the lid is right on top of that. So when I push, I can feel it hitting that inner piece. So in that situation, it's real simple. You just put a brick on it or put some other weight on it, and that will keep the bees from being able to push this up and get out into the syrup. That's just one thing to keep in mind. These little subtle things that are important in beekeeping. With this particular one, it snaps on. Now the only thing I have to worry about, this one, it's got a recessed lid. So I have to make sure I don't fill too much syrup. If I fill too much syrup, this lid doesn't sit down flat, it floats. And when it's floating, bees can get in this, in from the lid from this side. And that can invoke a robbing situation. So it's important that bees from other colonies can't get to this syrup. And so that's what I've got going on here. Another thing that I do, it's just me, this space here, bees can get into. And so if I'm changing out a feeder because say it's gotten moldy or something, I don't want to have to deal with the bees down in here. Sometimes they'll put bird comb in here, you know, they just propolize, they'll make a mess up in here. So you're trying to match this hole to this oblong oval hole in the inner cover. So what I'll do, I just take a piece of 1.25" schedule 40 pipe. I don't know, I've cut this maybe 3/4 of an inch. Stick it on there, and I build this little wood shim. This pops on, and it prevents bees from getting in that space. It's just something I do. It's not important, but it just makes me happy. And I think, you know, when I talk about bees, if it makes you happy and you feel good about it, you know, do it. So with this one, another thing that I do, because I put this feeder on, I've now blocked all the ventilation. So I add vent holes to all my inner covers. It's just how I do it. Ventilation is important for a lot of things. It's important for the bees to be able to cure their nectar into honey. Because even if you put all this ventilation on here, if you were to put an outer cover on here, as you can see, this inner cover has no slot in it. So if you were to put an outer cover on here, the outer cover would seal this surface as well. So all these vent holes you put in would be rendered useless because you've just sealed this entire top. So one of the things I do on all my outer covers, I put 2/4 inch shims in. That way when you set this on this, whether it's the inner cover you're setting on or a spacer board, you now have ventilation front and rear so that the bees can get air. Because moisture is actually heavier than air. Air is primarily made up of nitrogen and oxygen. Both of those molecules are lighter than moisture, than water vapor. So water vapor has a tendency to rise. So if you've got this all sealed off, the bees are going to have a heck of a time managing the flow through the bottom of the hive to try and get that moisture out of the top and cure the honey. Honey is very hygroscopic, so it's going to readily absorb moisture. So it just makes it a challenge for bees to process the honey and get it down to the 16 or so % that you would like. On this particular, this is one of my go-to hive tops, and this one actually has ribs in it that allow it to stand off of the inner cover or the shim board, and then it also has a little pocket up on each side where bees can get in there. So this is one of my favorite hive tops. It also lets light in. I typically have fewer wax moths in the inner cover because this is translucent. It just makes it lighter. So that's a few things on the rapid feeder style. The next one is the float feeder. Let me bring the camera over here. Like I said, every feeder has its pros and cons. The cons with the rapid feeder is it tends to mold, so it's not a huge deal. I don't care too much about it unless it gets really bad. But the positives about it is you can feed very easily with these. All you have to do is pop the outer cover off. You don't even have to get suited up because the bees can't get to you. You pop that lid off, you fill it with syrup, and the buoyancy of the bees get pushed up as you're filling that feeder, so you don't get drowned bees. It's easy to quickly just pop the top a little. You can see if they're drinking or if they're not, if they need more, if they don't. It's very visual. So now the negative about it is it only holds a half a gallon, but that just means you have to fill it a little more often. And it's good because it keeps you more in tune on what's going on with the hive. Whereas the next one are these raft feeders, and people tend to overfeed with these. You can put a couple gallons of syrup in here, and if the bees aren't drinking it fast enough, it can spoil on you. The other thing is, if once these are empty, if you just leave them on the hive, bees will start building burr comb up in here. This is a wonderful place for hive beetles to hide. So over time, if you left this empty, hive beetles would just start congregating in here. And the other thing is, bees will start propolizing this like crazy. They'll propolize these rafts down to this box because they're trying to prevent hive beetles from getting in there. Any place that the bees can't get to themselves, they'll try to seal it off to prevent hive beetles. And the other thing, if you know anything about hive beetles can use their mandibles to coerce the bees to actually feed them. So even though they have them trapped in here like jail, and they'll monitor and police them, keep them, but they keep them alive. They feed them while they're in there. I'm sure that if you've ever had this happen and you pulled one of this up, you've seen all those hive beetles running around. Notice that none of them are dead. That's because the bees are feeding them. So just something to keep in mind. One of the most important aspects feeding with a raft feeder like this is to make sure that other bees from other colonies can't get into this space. So when you put your inner cover on, if you left this open, you're gonna have issues with other bees from other colonies getting in here. And once they tell their friends, you're gonna have a huge robbing issue going on. So the way I prevent that is I seal that completely off. Now they still have ventilation, so it's all good. Another way to do that is to not have spacers in your outer cover. You put your outer cover on, it seals everything off. But the issue with that is now your honey's not gonna be able to, cure as well. I have some notes here just to make sure I've covered everything. These tend to not mold so much because the bees can get into all the crevices and areas and clean them, even though these have some mold on them. These are 8 years old. But typically, you don't have to clean these at the end of the year for the most part. You leave these out, put these pieces out, the bees will clean them up. Whereas these other plastic rapid feeders, you have to spritz them with bleach water, or pure bleach, or put them in bleach water, get the mold off. They're a little more pain in the butt at the end of the season to get them all cleaned up. That's really about it. One of the things, so all my hive stands have water bowls in them, so ants can't get into my hives. So I've never had this happen until this year. I have a couple hives, because I run out of space, that I've got them just on cinder blocks. So ants are getting in the hive. And both those hives have the exact same issue. Once the bees drink all the syrup, they will propolize this bottom seal all the way around. And it's to prevent ants from getting into the hive. Whereas my other hives that have ant protection, I don't have that issue. So that would be something, that would make these a little, because then when you you can't just refill these. You have to pull this out, and you have to get some of that propolis off, at least in a few spots, so that when you fill this with syrup, the bees can get to it again. So I've had an issue where I've put the syrup in, and none of it flowed into this space because the propolis had it all sealed. So that's really about it. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hope that you learned something from it. I'm just trying to help.